in a pricing architecture, we say, okay, so we have a product and we now want to price it. What are my options? Let's start there. And I'd say that you have, the first thing that you need to sort of consider is, well, am I charging something on a recurring basis or just on a transactional basis? So is this something that I just, I deliver something and then I charge for it and we're done? Or is it something that I keep delivering to you in some fashion and then I keep charging you? Okay, so it's a subscription or it's a usage-based pricing. If it's just transactional, then I divide it into when in the customer lifetime the transaction occurs. So it can be start costs, that would be onboarding, migration, training, and so forth to get a customer started, sign-up fees, and so forth. Or is it some ad hoc one-offs like, oh, we're going to build a certain integration for you at some point, or we're going to do some extra training, or we're going to add another location, or we're going to do something that is a one-off while you're still a customer, maybe underneath in your recurring relationship. Or is it something that I do once at the end to maybe offboard you? Or there can be some charge there. Okay, so that's just transactional cost. In a lot of startup and even sort of enterprise world, people hate these sort of one-offs because it's like, oh, but if we get the transactional revenue that we have and we convert it into ARR, annual recurring revenue, our company will be worth a lot more. Sure, but money is money, right? And if you just make a lot of cash in your business, you don't need to care about what it's worth. Like, just take the cash. All my businesses have been bootstrapped. And sometimes people just want to pay a lot more once than they want to pay on a recurring basis, even in their lifetime. So don't get too married to the idea of recurring revenue. If you have a delivery that keeps going over time, then a recurring revenue makes total sense. But if the delivery just happens and then goes away, just charge for it once. Yeah. So we built a 100-day process where the first 10 days, we do the integrations to the systems and we give all your technical people the tablets and so forth, and we set you up. And then we have a 60-day trial period where they then use the software and we're sort of on the phone every day and sort of figuring out that they're good to go and they know how to use it, and we monitor that they actually do the checks and so forth. And then we have a 30-day process where we have the specific workshop where we review all the KPIs that we agreed on in the sales process. And then when we show the KPIs, you now have the option to opt out. Because what happened at day one was that you signed up to pay now for the pilot, but also to subscribe for the full thing. So you have an opt-out period of 30 days where we agree to measure everything we did in the pilot. We think that, if we hit all the targets that we promised you, you are, at least in some way, you should create a situation where they feel morally obligated to continue and actually buy the full thing because they've signed it and they know the full price. Then say, okay, so we're going to pay whatever, 10 euros per employee or whatever it is. So that the actual big sale becomes a default because they've already signed it. And then you just prove it and give them an opt-out escape clause, essentially, if they for some reason don't want to do it or their budget collapses or they think that the KPIs were wrong. So you hit the KPIs, but really, you misunderstood their business or something. So you say, okay, well, you have an opt-out clause. But you should only start a pilot once you have solved the entire thing. And the pilot is just a safety hatch for the customer. And that also means that you should sell the pilot to the actual buyer, not just the gatekeeper that can pay the 20K. Right? And then if you charge 20K for the pilot or a recurring fee, doesn't matter. Like, actually, give it up for free. I don't care. Like, maybe they need some kind of commit, but the point of the pilot is to get them to a point where they can look back on actual performance of your product and have a really hard time opting out of what they have already opted into when they started the pilot. If you don't structure it that way, you're just creating an internal marketing project for your internal champion to go sell you, and that just you don't have a sale. In maybe 10% of times, they actually succeed in that. Make sense?
Very much. I think so much connected to the conversation I had earlier, and also with the customer that we're talking about a pilot, and then I'm like, yeah, what's going to happen after?
We're happy to do the pilot. This is how we do it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you asked. We do pilots with all our best customers. Great. This is how we do it. So first we sign the entire solution, right? And then we have 100 days of pilot. And then we have this workshop where we measure the performance of the pilot. And if you then don't want the entire solution, then you can opt out at that point. So you're off the hook. That's how we do the pilot.
So it doesn't have to be a transaction. Like it's more conversation and a commitment, right? That's the important part.
Yeah, so you get them to sign, you get the right person to sign the right document day one, right? And then sure, the pilot can be a one-off cost. But the promise and what is signed is that after 100 days, if not opted out of, then all the recurring stuff starts. And maybe the full like organization-wide implementation or whatever is required there. That's fine. Okay. Is it okay I go on a little bit? Because we're going to talk a little bit about pricing metrics and how you sort of choose these and what might be right for you. And I think you're gonna like that part, I hope. Okay, so just say, once we're then talking about recurring fees, you can split this up into two kinds. The ones that are a price per something, that's a pricing metric, price per user, price per API call, price per scan, price per event, whatever. Or the ones that are just flat, which is just 100 euros per month, right? Or 100,000 euros per month, doesn't matter, right? Flat fees are great. They have a lot of functions in a pricing model for various reasons. For example, let's say that you charge $10 per employee, or let's say you charge $10 per user, but you really don't want any customers below $1,000. So you say, okay, so we're going to charge $1,000 plus $10 per user. That's how we do that. So the flat fee sort of raises the bottom of the minimum customer, is one way that they work. Now, for metric-based fees, price per, you have three kinds. Licenses are the classical one, a user license. So I pay, I get access to something. So this is how most of your apps in the App Store work. Like I pay for a subscription for the app and I have access to the app, me, because it's my phone. And maybe that's whatever, $100 per year or $10 per month or whatever it is. Okay, that's it. I pay even though I don't use it, right?
Yeah.
So
it's a big concern for me.
yeah. So that's how licenses work. They're great. Some think, but you might have a case where usage-based pricing is better. Usage-based pricing is just what you do with your electricity meter. So you have access to electricity, but you don't pay until you use it. So you pay, and then the meter starts running, and then after a time period, the meter is read and you get billed, right? Okay, this is why so whenever you charge Azure, for example, and you say, oh, I pay per API call, I pay per one of these things, it's usually what is called recurring revenue. So it's the type of revenue that it isn't sort of fixed, so it's not recurring revenue, but it sort of keeps happening again and again because of the behavior of the customer. Okay, the third kind is credit-based metrics. So do any of you have Audible? Like the sound book app? Okay, they use credits, right? So you subscribe, you pay a fixed amount per month, and then every month you get a credit or 2 credits, depending on your subscription. And then if you don't spend the credits, they just sit in your account and then they accrue, like you add 2 more credits, so you have 2, then 4, then 6, then 8. Then summer comes around and you're like, oh, now finally I have time to listen to all these audiobooks. So I go in and I download 8 audiobooks. So I spend all my credits. But I don't cancel my subscription, right? Because, oh, this worked great. I paid. I have the credits now that I need them. I spend them. And then I keep the subscription, and then it adds 2 more and 2 more and 2 more and 2 more, right? And then another holiday comes around and I go spend my credits. So credit-based systems are essentially usage-based pricing paid upfront. So I pay for the usage. I download the audiobook. That's the consumption. It happens. I paid for that. But the billing is happening on a recurring basis. So it can work, but it takes a little bit sort of more care to design the details around it so that people don't get sort of hung up. There can be a lot of terms and conditions like, oh, do credits expire? Which credits do I use first? Like the oldest one or the newest ones? What do I get my credits back if I churn? Blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of questions around credits that just needs to be answered when you're in a sales context. I said earlier that there are 2 sort of almost rules of monetization and pricing. And one is do packaging. Like if you only have the MVP, just sell the MVP, but aim towards having more than one package, which is a great way to differentiate your customers, like first, second, third class train passengers. Okay. Second, have a pricing metric. price per mile. Like the further you go, the more the ticket is. Okay. In really simple B2C apps, we don't do that. We just say you are a user and you pay per month. That's it for the language app, let's say. Could be an example. So if you feel, oh, that's weird, and should I charge per flashcard or something? Like maybe you don't need to. Like so appropriate to your own situation. But as soon as the ACV, annual contract value, starts to get just above, let's say, a couple of €1,000, probably you need a pricing metric to start to differentiate your customers. Okay, so how do you choose a good one? I have spent many sleepless nights on this question so that you don't have to. And here are my conclusions. There are 4 things that you need to consider. I think I haven't come up yet with a situation where these 4 didn't solve for something, where we found a pricing metric that worked. I'm going to go through each of them quickly, and then I'm going to go through each of them slowly. Okay. First, in order for you to price per something, you must be able to measure it. Right? So if you can't measure it, then you can't price per it. Right? So I had a guy yesterday, he was like, oh, I'm going to price per hour saved in training time on technicians. I was like, how the hell are you going to measure that? I was like, yeah, but today they are spending so and so many hours on average, and then I can bring it down. Yeah, I said, but that's going to move, right? And they're going to do other things as well. So it's going to be really hard for you to pinpoint the hour you saved compared to all the other initiatives that the client has going on. So you can't measure that. So you can't use it as a pricing metric. Okay. Second, does the client want it? Or let's say, does the client want more of this in and of itself? Does the client want more users? Does the client want more flashcards? Let's say, just use that. Second, are they expecting to pay in this way? Or do they think it's weird or even unfair? Fourth, is the unit of, I call it density, but is the unit of an equal value? So let's say that you, Philip, that you decide to price per product. And not for individual unit, but like, okay, X, one product, and then
per product code.
Per product code, right? Then likely some product quotes is going to be, oh, we sell a couple of 100 units of these because it's like a weird little niche product. And then another one is like the 1 liter of skim milk and they sell millions of it. So for this product, the value is huge. And for this product, it's super minimal. So the density on the value on a per product basis is very low because one is huge and one is small. So this is what we mean. So the counter example would be Stripe. So Stripe prices a percentage of the dollars that you push through their payment platform. So it's 2.95% on the first level, right? And $1 is exactly the same as another dollar. Like a dollar is a dollar is a dollar. So the density of a dollar is 100%, which means that it's not that I prefer $1 over the other dollar. It's the same dollar, right? So I'm just give me more of those. So it has sort of perfect density. Okay. I'm going to go through each of them, but I'm going to give you an example to do that. Okay.
Is it okay to take a picture of it?
Sure, and I can send them to you after as well, but we like pictures, so. So go for it. Here you have a pricing matrix from 2021 AI. So they're a Danish company, they do AI for banks. And they do that on a platform that's called Grace. And so if you're a bank, you can buy a license for Grace, and you're then priced as per 2 pricing metrics. One is number of users. So small is up to 8, then medium is from 9 to 20, and then large is 21 and above. And it's a matrix. They price you per model in production. So I have an AI model. I can have it in testing, or I can have it sort of pushed into the business where it's in production and then it does something. So here we only charge for models that are in production and does something in the business. And if I have, let's say 5 and I have 10 employees, then I would read the matrix and I would go here and then I would pay €12,500 per month. So that's how it works. So price per model and price per user. Great. Now, value. Are users and models valuable to the bank? Yes. So I asked this and they confirmed, yes. More users equals more work done, equals more AI projects overall. They are valuable to the bank. Great. What about models in production? Also, that's why we're buying it. The model is only deployed when it is proven to create value. So when we have a model in production, it's because it does something. It creates a credit score, or it analyzes something, and then we get value out of that, either because we automate something or it powers a new business case. Super. Okay. Second question, do they want them? Different answer. Do they want models in production? Yes. They would like more models. That's why they are doing the thing in the first place. But users, they always say, yes, we agree that users equals value, so more users generate more value, but how many do we need? So how many users do we need as a minimum in order to do the thing that creates the models, which is what we want? Well, we want the models because there's an outcome, blah, 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 blah. So they had never sold more than 8 users in the first go, right? So the bank would buy 8 users, they would then work the solution, and then they would come back after sort of a cycle, which is a year and a half or so, and say, oh, this is really great, can we buy some more users, right? So 2021, they disliked this phenomenon. So they said, well, okay, now we're going to do some feature differentiation over here. So if you want to have, let's say, Spark or Medium or one of these things, then you need to be enterprise. So they sort of try to sort of force through functionality thresholds the customer into larger tiers, which the customers dislike. So they say, yeah, we want Spark, but we only have 5 users. So now we feel like we're getting weirdly overpaid or overpriced. So the question is, why don't they want more users? Like, they have just stated themselves that users are valuable, like they create value. Why wouldn't they want more of them? And
who, the banks or
the banks?
Yeah.
No, so 2021, they want to sell more users, like definitely, right? But the banks don't want, the banks agree that users generate value, they just don't want to buy them.
What is a user in this concept?
It's someone who has access to the Grace license and can build AI models and deploy them. Yeah. In order to sort of understand what's going on, we need to sort of dig a little bit into sort of what it means to create value or be valuable in a context, because the devil is in the detail here. So in order for us to create value, we can look at this as a value chain. So I do something that allows me to do something else, that allows me to do something else, that allows me to get something I want, right? So I work out so that I lose weight, right? So there's a process going on. There's a causality with steps that start somewhere and ends with something I want. So at one end, I have input, I sacrifice my time and effort and so forth, and then I get something that I would rather want, which is whatever, to not be unattractive or something. And this is the exact same with all kinds of business models. So for the banks that use the Grace license, they say, well, we create an AI model project and team. So we're like, we want to do AI. So we're going to hire some people to do AI, and we're going to give them a budget, and then we're going to send them off their way. Then these people find some data sources and some idea for AI models, and they start to train some models, which they then deploy into the business, which then generates an outcome, like they do the credit scores or whatever, it automates something. Great. That's the outcome we wanted, right? So we invested the team and the budget in order to get the credit scores. Like, it generates revenue. It does something for us in the other end of one. Like, nobody wants an AI team. What we want is whatever the AI team does for us in the end. So one is an input end, aka cost, that is necessary because it causally creates the value that it comes out on the other end. What mostly everybody wants is to just have as much value as they can with as little cost as possible. So, if you have a value chain like this, you can look at each of the steps and say, what can I measure here? And then we see that we could measure users here because they are the AI project team, right? And here we might measure data sources, a gigawatts processed or whatever. Here we might measure models in production, and here we might measure the credit scores or whatever comes out. Okay, great. These are the potential pricing metrics. That's how you come up with candidates for how could we price. Just like, what is the value creation process? What can we measure? Can we price by that? The key takeaway is that, think of it like a rainbow, the gold is at the end, right? People want what is at the end of the value chain. They will accept to pay for what is at the beginning. That's why they have the process. Like they think that whatever I have to pay to get through this, what's at the end of my chain is going to be better, right? So they're fine with paying for users because they want the gold, right? But it isn't that they want the users. It's that they accept paying for them as a necessity to get the gold. And let me sort of break down what would be the way that, so they price here and they price here, right? So for them it would be like, what would happen if you didn't price here? And maybe that goes to you guys at the back, right? Mm. What would happen if you didn't price per user? Well, users are free.
Yeah.
Push all the users in you want. Would you get more users?
Yeah.
Yeah. Same as 2021, right? Mm. They would then get more users. What would the more users do?
Use more data, process more data though.
And they would then create more models faster, right? Which is what we then price. Mm. Great. So now we have reduced the cost for the client of adopting the solution. They can get however much they want. They can invest more heavily into the value process, and then instead of, let's say, taxing that process at the end, like making it harder to get started, we just tax it at the end. We just take value when it is actually sort of created at the end, right? Try to draw a sort of 2 to 5 step version of the value creation process that you have or bring to your customers. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story. And so for those of you who didn't notice, when we had the bank thing, when we said, okay, we have a team and they have some data and they train some models and then there's some data outputs. What I didn't actually suggest was that they price per data output. Yeah. Why not? Because that's at the end of the chain, right? Oh. Right. But there's an issue. Okay, let me illustrate. So imagine that I'm home on a Thursday evening and suddenly I have water in my kitchen. So there's a burst pipe. Okay, so I go to Google, I Google emergency plumber, and I call the first guy and he comes straight over. And just when I open the door, I said, oh, you're lucky, I found parking like right down on the street. Where's the problem? I say, well, it's the kitchen, it's all flooded. And he says, okay, I'll fix it. But just before he walks into my apartment, he then notices my nice carpets and floors and say, oh, and then takes off his shoes and then goes in and fixes the thing in the kitchen. Then he says, well, okay, it was just like an O-ring or something. I replaced it. I'm going to send you an invoice. Goes home, sends me an invoice. 3 things on the invoice. We're going to measure those 3 things on 2 dimensions. Value and expectation to pay. Okay. Up here we have time and materials. So he spent time and there was a spare part, right? Okay. Is it valuable to me? Do I actually want that? Yeah. Yes. Like I Googled emergency plumber and I expected him to show up and be competent and have spare parts if needed, right? I have clear demand for that.
Was that all actually those numbers, 250 euros?
Yeah.
Also those numbers, yeah. So
even more.
Expectation to pay, am I expecting to be charged for time and material? Absolutely, right? But why?
Because you accessed a very specific service that had to call for his availability in order to make sure to solve it.
No, because else you would have had to go and buy it and do this and do that.
Okay, so I break it down as follows. 1, I'm used to paying for it. Like other people charge me for time and material. So like, sure, I'll pay it here too. Like this actually works in a lot of pricing models. Like maybe you price per users and you have no reason to do so, but your customers will accept it simply because they pay for users everywhere else. Like so just, sure, like we know that one, let's do it here. Like a lot of pricing is actually run that way. So it's just habit. 2, he has costs involved. He paid with his time, so he has opportunity costs. He could have been home, right? And he had to buy the spare part that he now gives me. Okay, so there are clear costs that flow through that I have to relieve him of by paying. Okay, the second thing. 3rd, time and materials are a clear causal component. Like they're the reason that I got my job done, right? So they weren't something that, it wasn't that I was paying for a spare part that he just had in his warehouse. It's like, no, it was the spare part that he used to fix my thing. That's the one I paid for, right? So there's a very clear reason why, especially this was needed to solve my problem. Okay, those are the 3 things. Causal connection, cost, and habit. Okay, let's go to the second thing on the invoice. Parking fee. He had to pay for parking because I live in a street where parking is not free. So he had to pay for parking. Now, let's ask the same questions. Do I have demand for that? Less, right? It's not like I Googled parking. It's like, okay, but do I expect to pay for it? Or let's use another word. Do I think it's fair that I pay for it? Sure. Let's use the same criteria. Am I used to pay for parking? Well, because of where I live, I'm actually used to pay for parking when I call plumbers and so forth. So I usually just get the ticket because they just park the car, get a ticket, and I pay for the ticket. Does it have a causal connection to them delivering the work? Sure, like they had to park somewhere in order to get to where I live. Okay, sure. And does it have a cost to them? Yeah, they had to pay for parking. They had to pay the exact €8.72. So cost, causal connection, and habit all apply. High degree of expectation to pay in fairness, right? So when you charge per hour for your physiotherapy, one of the reasons people want to pay for it is that you spend an hour doing it. Also, they're very used to paying for hours of physiotherapy. So it's a habit. And is the physiotherapy helping them getting their problem solved? Hopefully, right? So sure, that's why we think that's a fair model. So last thing, shoe fee, €10. Shoe service. Now, the reason you're laughing is because nobody wants to pay for this, right? Which is exactly sort of the point of the illustration. Because let's ask the questions again. Do you want the plumber to take off his shoes?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a valuable service. Like if you got that on a survey, you would say like 5 out of 5. I really like them to treat my home with respect and not make a mess and do all the things. Like, for example, take his shoes out. Sure, I have demand for that. Do you want to pay for it? No. I think it's weird and unfair and like, I don't want to pay for that. So I would call them up and argue the €10 and not the 250, right? Because I think it's unfair. Why is it unfair? Well, are you used to paying for shoe fees? No. It's weird. I haven't done it before. 2, does it have a causal connection with him delivering the value? It's not that I don't think it's valuable. It's like, but it isn't like taking off his shoes that have nothing to do with the main job of like fixing my burst pipe, right? So that's not it. Does he has a cost of taking off shoes? No. Well, it took him a second, right? But it's like, yeah, but surely it's just like marking up something, right? So parking fees are great, especially for larger users, like larger accounts, like enterprise software. They're used to paying all sorts of fees and things. So I once had there was an insurtech client, and they did so we started when they did around 60 million Danish in ARR on around 30 customers, so 30 insurance companies. And we raised prices 60%, so to around 100 million on those same 30 customers, simply by adding infrastructure fees. So because they didn't have any of those before, and then we said, okay, so it was a price per claim, per insurance claim. But then we said, but you also have a lot of data storage and you have a lot of third-party data sources and a lot of licenses and integrations and all the things that your IT department understands well and is already paying for. So we're now going to charge for those as well. And that's the extra price. So the core price per claim, which was up here, sort of remained the same, but then we just also started to charge for all the parking fees, the infrastructure and so forth. And partly because it was another budget, but also because it made so much sense to the customer that these things were like, we're used to paying for them. They have obvious costs to you, and they are, of course, a sort of a clear necessity to deliver the value to us. So, of course, they need to be paid for. So we'll pay for them. That's it. So we raise prices 60% with no churn.
Will you use the model like you had before with the starting price and the exit price to actually include some of the things that, because we're thinking now customizing the dashboard, right? So when you need to onboard a customer, then you need to create a space for that company with the logo and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the starting point, right? So
Yeah.
where would this be in the matrix? I mean,
I put it on the flat fee on the base.
So you can have an onboard. So you're talking about the one where all the pricing architecture was, right?
Exactly.
Famous picture.
Weirdly, why that slide always sort of gets people's attention. Okay, let's go see if we can go back to it really quickly. Okay.
But I was trying to kind of make a connection between.
You can have an onboarding fee, definitely.
Yeah.
Right? Then you can have a platform fee with all the dashboards and the stuff that you give to whoever needs to look at the dashboards. And then you can probably have some sort of a credit-based model for, let's say, running certifications. And saying, oh, you are 10,000 employees, so you need 10,000 credits, right? To be minimally compliant, but we suggest 20,000 if you want to hit this benchmark, blah, 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 whatever. And then we give you these options. And then we do all the internal marketing, and then your executives and HR departments and compliance, whatever, can sit and look at the dashboard and see what we do, and then they can pull their reports out of it. Okay. Something like that.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, but I was trying to make a connection between this and actually this scale you showed us now to understand, do you take some of the things like the data outputs, which is like, can you put it somewhere here and be like, that's an exit cost, or that's a start cost, or like, just go there. I mean, I know you don't like it, I know you don't want to pay for it, but it just goes there, and that's how we work. And if you want the other nice things, then you need to pay for the. I think each of the things that has expectation to pay and so forth, whether you want to have it as a flat fee or metric-based fee, sort of partly depends on what it is. Is it something that really sort of scales up with the volume, or is it just something that you want to put in? Mm-hmm. So for enterprise software, sometimes I just put in a platform before they get any usable functionality. And we say, well, the platform is just where all the dashboards and analytics sit. And you have all the integrations, and you have all the user management, and you have all the other things that are essentially generic features. It has nothing to do with what we actually do, but then you can also buy modules where we actually do things, like we do the sustainability thing, and then and so forth, right? And then there's a platform fee. And that essentially becomes a flat fee in the model to just lift every customer up, and then whatever is in the modules then drives sort of on a volume basis per employee or per certificate or whatever it would be. And you can also charge onboarding fees, like platform onboarding, like onboarding training for senior management, whatever.
The trainer and so on.
Yeah. Philip?
In this specific case, I thought if there were like if there was like 30 for the shoe and 62 for the parking, like putting it all together would be like, why did it cost so much in time and materials, But would you say when it's only these lower numbers, it would be better to just give you a bill where it's just 268 for time and materials done, so he doesn't risk it? You're gonna be like, why the hell do I pay a shoe fee? Why do I?
But then so sure. But then at some point 258 becomes too much, right? Because then I start to benchmark that. It's like, well, what time and what material, right? So it increases the pricing power if I can say, well, these 272. So let's use the example with the growth down here, right? So, and you can apply it to your case as well. So let's say that they say, well, we have a platform fee where we do all the dashboards and the infrastructure and the integrations and the third-party data sources and the benchmarking, and you can do the reporting, whatever, right? That's what we have right here. And that is, I don't know, 30,000 euros a year. Yeah. I'm just inventing a number, right? And then we price per credit of learning, right? Mm-hmm. And then these courses are all basic, they cost 1 credit, and these are more advanced, they cost 3 credits. That's about it. And we only charge for people who actually complete the thing. Okay, sure. When you then negotiate this with the customer, what will happen psychologically is usually that they would focus on the price per credit, especially at volumes, and they will usually leave the platform alone, which means that
a larger portion of your pricing in this enterprise sale is being left out of the question, especially if it has a really high expectation to pay, clear costs, and so forth. So sometimes this is a little bit more sophisticated, but it's a concept that I call wallet structuring, where you try to break your pricing into components that speak to different budgets in the organization, right? So you say, oh, I have a pricing, and this part speaks to the IT department, right? So it's all IT stuff. It's like gigabytes and API calls and data sources and whatever, things they used to pay for. And they have budget for these, and they're like, sure, somebody needs to pay for them. It's clearly us. We'll do that. And then you have something with training, which then can be put onto the HR sustainability department, and they have budget for that, and they need to be able to see these things, right? So if you do that, you can actually just extract more money. So let's say your example, Francisco, your customers likely have internal wallet compartments for food or for entertainment or for things. So let's say you did an event, and then if you added dinner to that event, you could charge more, right? You say, well, the exhibition and the talk is whatever, 200 kroners. We'll do a private tour, blah, blah. And then we'll all meet for dinner after this nice restaurant, and that's going to be 800 with the wine included. Oh, great. Like, so, or you could say, well, it's going to be 500. If you want the wine, it's another 300, right? Because people have these different buckets for what they want to pay for. So it's like, okay, so the event is only 200, but do you want to do the dinner as well? Sure. And then they know sort of what a dinner should cost for their segment, so they're happy to go for it. And then you take out the private dining room in the restaurant and you negotiate a better price and you make whatever, something on the drinks and so forth. So I think this is the way where we, even on a smaller scale, so even with smaller customers can say, hey, what are they used to pay for and how can we sort of tap into these things, right? And you, Philip, you might also be able to charge sort of a price per marketing department as a flat fee and then a price per impression or sort of per interaction that you have, saying, hey, we need to onboard you properly and we need to have customer support and we need to be able to respond when we need to, and we need to have the integrations and we need to set up the data sources and so forth. And that just has a flat cost. But then you just pay for, and that's low or let's say reasonable, but then you pay for the performance on top. Make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So if the time and materials would have been, let's say, 600 euros, and the shoe fee in his eyes would have been €1.5,
yeah,
then it would have been better to maybe just put them together so you didn't have a frustrated value of paying €1.5. But since the ratio is more like this,
yeah, but then it also becomes like, do the numbers make, because if you're selling API calls, you can't charge €1 per API call because people who pay for API calls are really used to a very certain price range.
Yeah, okay.
So Francesco, I'm inventing products for you, right? But he can't charge like 3,000 for the dinner because he's just like bundling in the boat ride. Like because people know what they want to pay for dinner.
Right.
So, and you need to just appreciate these things and say, well, this is what I can charge because they will evaluate it sort of on a line by line basis. But what they actually sometimes will not do is across the different budgets and stakeholders sort of evaluate the total cost of ownership compared to the outcome. I have a user, maybe it's here, whatever, but it's sort of under this line. Okay, I have a user that have done some training, moves up. I have a user that has done some training well, moves up a little bit more. Like, so I think the small distinctions, and this is why sort of maybe certificates are like completed training things might be higher than your users. I think so. Again, if you're asking yourself the question like, is it above or below this line? You should ask yourself the question: does my customer naturally want more of it, just for the heck of it? If I removed pricing, would they sort of just on their own just explode in volume? Or would it be the same?
Up, down, they would want more of it. They will want more of it than everything that is up.
Sure, all here is just like, okay, sure, like I need it or I don't need it. I think SSO and all the other things are here, right? People know they want to pay for it.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, we don't necessarily want it, but somebody has to pay for it. We're very used to paying for it. It's a necessary component of delivering the value. We're fine. Like, give us those things.
Yeah.
Good, but get rid of it. It is what we're doing. So I think for you, it's figuring out something where they really say, oh, can we do that more, right?
It's the users that
they come and bargain for, right? They would like to take a flat fee if possible because they come and say, but we don't know how many users we have, right? So I'm like, but do you want them to go or not?
Okay, so let me give you another model. So I know maybe I'm banging this drum too much, so let me know, right? But let's say that you say, okay, so if you actually, what you do is you provide training in some form. And say, okay, so we move it back in the value chain to completed trainings.
Yeah.
And then we sell them credits on that.
Yeah.
Right? So you're saying, okay, so I'm going to sell you, we don't care how, you don't know how many users you have. We don't know either, but we know sort of roughly how many you have, right? So you have more than 1,000, but you have maybe less than 3,000. Okay, let's start there. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you 1,000 credits or 100, whatever it is, right? An amount so that you can get started. And then next year, we're going to sell you 100 more. So it's a subscription, right? Every year you add these credits. If you need more, let us know. We will sell you 200 next year. We increase the subscription. So it's usage-based pricing upfront. If you don't use the 100 credits, we will have a conversation like from an ordinary customer success perspective of what's going on, because we thought that it's in our interest and yours to use the solution. So we want to know if we could do something that would create more value for you. But if you just like had other priorities, we will just take the credits you didn't use and just roll them over to next year. So let's say you roll over 20 credits and you get the 100 new ones, then you have 120. Okay, great. Now you can, what you didn't have time to do this year, you can catch up next year. Great, that's how it works, right?
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get to something where people would say, okay, so I think it's fair that I pay for it because I'm never going to pay for something that I'm not going to use, which is the problem with users per year. Like I'm paying for a user, but maybe they're not going to do anything, right? So I wasted it. Okay. So that means that the expectation to pay goes up. Also, what we're changing the unit to is actually not the user, but the outcome of having completed something, right? Which is what we charge the credit for. So you can say, oh, I can have 100 people go through the training and then fail, and then it's free. Sure. Like, okay, so then that's on us. We need to create better training, right? But if they complete it, we'll do these things, right? And if they complete it, then down in your platform fee, you can do all the reports and so forth, right? And we will help you with employer branding and blah, blah, blah. You can figure out what the next is. But I think something I learned that on credits, on training, is probably an easier model than what you have today, where you're just trying to say, wow, you need to buy 3,000 users up front. And people are like, yeah, maybe not, right? Because they want to test it out and see where the value is.
Yeah.
Make sense?
For me, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I want to spend 10 minutes on the last part of this, of selecting pricing metrics, because we had four dimensions of criteria for pricing metrics. 1, you can measure it. 2, there's actually demand for it. 3, it's fair, or there's expectation to pay, right? But the 4th one is actually how dense it is. And I told it a bit before, like with you, Philip, is a product can be like a huge volume product with a lot of revenue in it, or it could be a very small product. So there's different density. And I mentioned Stripe, which has perfect density because they price the dollar that goes through, and $1 is the same as the next dollar, right? So I have a Swiss client. They're called LifeGen. I'm actually also an investor. And they have a piece of software that sits between hospitals, pharma companies, and insurance companies. So insurance companies pays when a hospital buys medicine from a pharma company, right? So Pfizer sells painkillers to a hospital, and then the national insurance system pays for that, for the health insurance. Okay, sure. So the way that pharmaceuticals are sold is that on day one, they're sold at full price. And then discounts can work in different ways. It can be volume discounts, but it can also be, oh, it didn't work as well as expected discounts. So a lot of cancer medicine, for example, is priced depending on how long the patient survives. So if the patient dies straight away, treatment is free. If patient lives for more than 40 days, costs something. If lives more than half a year, costs something else. That's actually how it runs. So, but on day one, they pay full price, as if the patient would recover fully. So then when the hospital then loses the patient immediately, unfortunately, then they go and ask the pharmaceutical company for reimbursement for the discount. Say, hey, you sold us full price, but as per our contract, we only pay this when the patient only lives this long. Okay, called value-based contracts in pharmaceuticals. So they set up the platform that handles all of this data flow and reimbursements and so forth between these guys. Great. Again, input and output. They can actually not measure these that well, but they can do these things. They have a lot of things they can measure. We went through sort of the same exercise that you guys have just went through, and we can sort of plot them into a scheme like this, where value and fairness and all these things. Okay, great. So far, so good. They thought, hey, we think that price per patient just makes a lot of sense. Like the customers, they know how many patients they have. They can count them. That's great. When we talk to the finance guys in the insurance companies, they think a price per claim or price per invoice is also really good because it's really easy to measure. And they process these and so forth. Okay. But it has issues. So in Switzerland, which is their home market, they have a very large insurance company that deals with around 1 million insurance cases, health cases a year, so 1 million patients. And the average value on a reimbursement case is 20 euros. So it's 20 million euros that gets reimbursed every year from these pharma companies. But the value is really, really skewed. So 700,000 out of those million, the value is zero. There's no reimbursement. And on a very few of these customers, there's actually reimbursements of up to 1 million euros. So you have a super like 80-20, like power law dynamic driven distribution of the value in this patient population, where very few patients are most of the value. And then most of the patients have zero value. So if we use this average value per patient and say, well, okay, so the value is 20 euros, maybe we can charge 5, right? 2, whatever. We take a fraction of the average, then regardless of what we charge here, the insurance company is going to look at the price and say, okay, 2 euros per patient. They say, well, we have 700,000 patients that's worth 0. So we could save 1.4 million if we just didn't give you that flow. If we just found a way to only send the 300,000 through that actually has value, right? And this is what happens when you have a pricing metric that is very not dense, is that customers, if they're sophisticated, will start to try and sort their volumes so you only get parts of the volume. So, does it make sense to you guys? Sure. If you don't have this problem, you're probably like, yeah, I get the conceptually, but I don't care. But if you have this problem, sometimes this is sort of the light bulb that goes off in people's head because of their pricing model. Like, that's what's going on. Like, this is why we can't do this. So, some of this is solved by just going further and further back into the value chain, right? So, price per user or per employee in your case down there is quite undense, but price per trained user or certificate is more dense because it actually sorts out all the ones that isn't using the software, right? So already there we're making it more dense, but we're also going a little bit further back in the value chain, so everything is good here, right? Sometimes you can also see that if you take something that is a license, I get a right to use something versus I have used it, so I get a right to a physiotherapy class, or I have used a physiotherapy class. Maybe the density on the I actually have used it is higher, so I have a higher willingness to pay for that because it's like, oh, if you don't show up, you don't pay. But if you show up, you do pay. Oh, okay, great. So I don't have to factor in mentally all the times I'm not going to show up, which I don't want to pay for. So I emotionally want a discount for them, right? Because I feel that I will regret having bought the ones where I didn't show up. So this is what goes on. So there are usually 2 distributions that can trip us up. One is this, where you have a power law, and the other is where you just have a very broad range. So it's like a bell curve, but it's just very flat bell curve. Okay. So I usually take this and just make them make them bigger if they have good density. Now Simon is gone, but his would sit up here as well. Like transaction volume in money is usually super good density because whatever the client makes, you make a fraction of, right?
Why do you use the term density? What is it that is dense?
So it's where the sort of, if something has like a very vague value, because it can be a lot of things, I just think it's very undense. I don't know. So pricing validation works in the following way. And if you have a B2C context, it can be a little bit different, but hear me out. So generally what you want to do is you want to create new pricing. And if you don't have a product yet, you just create the pricing, the first one that you go into. And then you say, okay, so before I start to sell it in the market, I want to know if it works, right? So you have this, and this is what I call the validation phase. So the validation phase isn't the sales test when you actually try to sell it to someone. It's the step before where you just say, well, okay, does this have legs? Can people understand it and so forth? There are two kinds. You can do it, if you have a big organization, you need to do internal validation as well, which means that you need to go to everyone in your organization to see if you get it, right? Because the CEO can come up with pricing on his vacation, but if it can't be, deployed in product, and if the CFO can't bill it and so forth, then it's an issue, right? But so I think you're all small enough for that not to be a problem. So let's focus on the customer side. Here's how you do it. You create a PowerPoint, which I call a product in PowerPoint. And then on slide 1, you write your company name. And then on slide 2, you write the job to be done that you solve for customers. So we say, we help small producers get more sale by showing their sustainability efforts. Let's say that's for you, Phil, right? Or we help seniors get more enjoyable and fun free time. Whatever is sort of how you want to nail it. But this is sort of the one tagline that sort of brings customers through the door. And if your customers don't connect with this, then you don't need to show them the rest of the presentation, right? So this is that simple. If the customer is like, okay, why? Then, okay, you need to sort of go back and find a source of demand, right? So if you say, we help elderly people get pain-free in their own homes. Oh, great. Okay, I'm now listening. I want to hear more about that. How do you do that? What's the thing, right? The next slide then is your packaging. So you're saying, oh, we have a platform, and then we have this module, and we have this service, and then this onboarding, whatever it is. Or we can do sort of the 12 treatment packages, or we can do ongoing subscriptions, or we can do single ones, like whatever you have. So you just show them what is for sale. As simple as that. You don't show them the price, but you show them what is for sale. And then you ask them 2 questions. Is it clear? Like, do you understand what I'm trying to show you? And 2, do you want it? Or do you want any of this? And it needs to be those 2 things. Like the customer needs to clearly understand what you're trying to sell them or show them. So, because if they don't, it's like, what the hell is this? And what are these features? And what are you trying to do here? Like, then they're never going to buy it anyways, right? So it needs to be clear. And then they need to be, oh, and the second package, that's probably for me. Or I would probably start there, or whatever it is that they say. But they need to connect with at least one of the packages, as in that solves whatever job I showed you first. So they take the job and they say, okay, in order to solve that, I would go for this particular version of your delivery. Great. And then you move to the pricing model. So you don't show them how you price, but you say something like, 12-session program is a fixed fee for 12 sessions, and then it can be used over a year, and it's priced per month. But you don't say 6,000 kroner or whatever we came up with the price, right? So you just leave the price point out. But you show them the model, you show them how it's paid, you show them it's a price per, whatever it is, it's a price per language, it's a price per flashcard, it's a price per student, whatever it was, or it's a price per event with all the sort of the extras like dinner and the trip and so forth. Or it's a price per, for the platform, we have a flat fee, and for the interactions, we then have a volume-based fees in tranches. Whatever it is that you charge for. We price per a percentage of the revenue of the platform. But you don't show them the numbers, you show them how. And then you ask, does this make sense to you? Does this seem fair? Fair is sort of the trigger word here. And then the customer will say something like, oh, but then I have no idea how much I'm going to pay. So, okay, that isn't a function of how expensive it is. That's a function of the model itself, right? If they don't know how much they're going to pay, because they say, well, if it's $1 or if it's 10, I still don't know how many I have. And that's the problem. So, or they're going to say, that seems perfectly fair, but you know, that budget is really tight right now because we would charge it on the HR thing. And so they tell you where they're going to charge it, and maybe they have certain constraints there. Or they tell you something else. But just their reaction to how you will price will give you a lot of insight of whether they actually are able to or will want to pay for this, right? Okay. And then finally, you show them the actual price points. You say, it is going to be 3,000 for the 6-time event, or 6,000 for the 12-time event, or whatever it is, or it's going to be 49 euros per month for unlimited flashcards, or it's going to be whatever per event, and so forth, right? You just tell them the prices. If you know the client well, you can calculate out the price for them. Say, and I know that, so if you had to go for this, you would pay so. If you had this many impressions in this platform and 17 million products or whatever, you would pay this per year, and so on. And then you shut up. So you don't start to argue it. And that's really only half of your total cost now. So shut up. Just give them the price and then shut up. Then you listen. Because the next thing that's going to happen if you shut up is that the customer will try to figure out if that price is high or low by finding something else to compare it to. No price is high or low on its own. Prices are only anything when they're compared to something else. Right? So if you charge 500 per month, your customers might say, oh, that is more than I can afford. They haven't said anything about whether it's worth it or not. That's not even on their radar. They can just say, I can't afford that. Or if you say, oh, that's 1,000 per session, they might say, oh, but my other physio only charges 800. So now you're comparing it to another service, right? So depending on what they're comparing it to, that essentially is your competition. Because that's the alternative that you're being compared to.